True Crime Screening Room is a presentation of Podcast Picks with Jim the Podcast Sherpa. Please keep in mind that some of the topics discussed might be too intense for younger or sensitive listeners. Even Jim the Podcast Sherpa conducts some of these interviews while hiding under his desk, all while holding a stuffed mountain lion named Mr. Wubby.
Welcome to True Crime Screening Room, the podcast featuring interviews with creators who dedicate their work to unraveling true crime mysteries. We're now entering the investigation room in the Sherpa Chalet to meet your host, Jim the Podcast Sherpa.
Hello there, rebels of the Sherpolution, and welcome to True Crime Screening Room. It is a side project of Podcast Picks with Jim the Podcast Sherpa, which just coincidentally happens to be me, and I am coming to you from the investigation room from Sherpaloo Studios in the Sherpa Chalet, higher top mount podcast here, where I overlook the millions and millions of podcasts that are out there. But we're not talking podcasts this week. No, we are talking true crime. And I've got a really interesting guest this week. His name is G.H. Cliff, actually, formerly Dr. Gerald Cliff, Gerry, as we got to call him for the interview. And he has a new book out regarding serial predators in the city of Detroit, Michigan. And imagine this. It's a hard enough job for the police to track down one predator. But imagine there are 7 going on roughly around the same time in the span of about 4 or 5 years. So I got to sit down with Gerry for a little while, got to get to know him. He's got a really extensive background in law enforcement, as a matter of fact, and he does talk about that. And he talks about the book as well and what really set a lot of the different predators apart from each other and what they went through to catch them. The book is actually a very detailed account as far as police procedures are concerned, and it's written to really draw the reader in so that they understand what the police go through when they're having to deal with cases like this. And he really provides some really good information as far as the book is concerned. So I got to spend a little time with him. He was at his home in Michigan, and we chatted away. He's a super nice guy and really had some really fascinating information regarding the book and his career as well. So let's check out my interview with author G.H. Cliff. Hello there, rebels. We are here in the investigation room at the Sherpa Chalet, and my guest today has a brand new book out. It is called Serial City, Detroit, and the Hunt for Multiple Serial Predators. His name is G.H. Cliff. We're calling him Gerry for this interview. Gerry, pleasure to meet you. He's coming to us from Detroit as well. So welcome to the show.
The suburbs of Detroit. Yeah, that'll do.
Have you been a lifelong Michigan resident?
Always, yeah. I was born and raised in Battle Creek, Michigan. You know, the other serial city. Kind of had a little influence on my selection of titles. Kind of a backhanded joke. But and I moved to Detroit when I was 21 to join the police department, and the rest is infamy or history.
You had an extensive career in law enforcement, haven't you?
I did 31 years in Detroit. I worked everything you could imagine. I worked the tactical unit. I was a counter sniper. I was a dog handler. I was underwater recovery team. I was, as I rose through the ranks, I did precinct special operations, which was mostly plainclothes. We created a home invasion task force, street robbery task force, and from that I got promoted to the executive ranks. In those days, we called the rank above lieutenant inspectors. but a chief from LA came in and changed it to captain, which is more consistent, I think, with the rest of the country. And from there, I made commander. From there, I left and became chief of police in a town about 80 miles north of us called Saginaw, Michigan.
Mhm.
I did that for 7.5 years. And from there, I went to the National White Collar Crime Center as the research director, because in my spare time as a cop, rather than taking up heavy drinking, gambling, and chasing strippers, I stayed in college and you know just kept going until I got a PhD. So I did research director at National White Collar Crime Center for about 6 years. Left to come back to Michigan, and for about 1.5 years, I was a consultant to a company that serviced the Albuquerque, New Mexico Police Department in addressing their issues with the federal DOJ consent decree. From there, the rest, I just kind of decided it was probably time to quit and enjoy retirement. So all I've been doing now is writing books about all of the files that I copied when I was running the big investigative units in Detroit.
So, with this book, where exactly were you in the police department? At what position?
I was the commanding officer of a section of major crimes, which was at the time called Special Investigations Section.
Mhm.
That consisted of child abuse, domestic violence, sex crimes, armed robbery, financial crimes, the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, and we had cyber crimes. We had two people trained in cyber crimes analysis.
And the range actually for all these perpetrators seemed it was about for 4 years, right? From about 98 to 2002.
Well, the yeah, I think the East Side serial schoolgirl rapist that we got started with was in late '98 into '99. I assumed command of the violent crime section in November '99 and had to deal with him. Um, Not personally.
Right.
I had some tremendous people working for me at Violent Crimes. Uh, while we were working him, we realized that there was a second serial working the same two precincts, targeting the same subjects, and we had no sooner arrested the first of the two. The second one effectively disappeared. He reemerged about 2 years later. What happened was he went to prison for armed robbery.
Mhm.
But uh, within weeks of dealing with that, we got the John Eric Armstrong case, which he murdered 19 women all over the world. We found a body dump on the west side of the city. Um, Managed to pair it to him. We had him in custody within 41 hours of finding his body dump. And from there, we had, I think, 5 other serials that we dealt with from 2000, early 2000, right into toward the end of 2002, and then in 2003, the serial rapist that had disappeared during the first uh, incidents there in '99 got out of prison and started all over again, picked up where he left off, so to speak, and we had to catch him.
Oh wow! So, needless to say, that continuous flow of events has kept you busy in that during your time there with Detroit Police Department.
I found it really interesting. The reason I picked that topic to write on was when I first became an executive and took over the violent crime section. I was told that one of the things violent crimes was known for was handling repeat offenders and serial criminals.
Mhm.
Uh, whenever homicide ran into a case that was a little too difficult for him, the chief would always call on violent crimes. So we were kind of his go-to unit. And being the ever productive student, I read everything I could find on serials. And what was fascinating for me about writing this book was that all of the elements of serial offenders that the psychologists all talk about are illustrated in a real life case in this book. We had dual offenders working the same area, very, very rare. That hardly ever happens, where the offenders don't know one another, but they just happen to be working the same two precincts in this case, targeting the same offenders. And it posed a little bit of a problem for us. We caught the first guy, Dusselonger Ross. Then we had him for 8 using DNA evidence. He confessed later to, I think, 26 total. But when we caught him, the chief was eager to make a press release that, because the city knew we had a serial rapist targeting girls. He wanted to put the city at ease. My boss, the commander of major crimes, in my office, told the chief to his face. He said, "Boss, you got to be really, really careful here." He said, because yes, we caught a guy that is good for at least 6, according to DNA evidence, but he says there's 4 other sets of DNA from schoolgirl victims out there that don't match him. So we have 2 working the same neighborhoods and the same target population. The second guy was Paul Ellis Smith. He was dubbed the bicycle rapist for a number of reasons. Obviously, because he traveled on a bicycle, which made him really hard to catch.
Mhm.
And at the same time that we caught the first one, Ross, Smith stopped. We had no more schoolgirl rapes after we locked up Ross. And I mean, we counted our blessings and we just held our breath, and the serial string had stopped until 2 years later. It turned up again, and same DNA and the same bicycle. And that kind of confirmed something that I had read in all of the literature about serial offenders. They never stop. They either relocate, go to prison, or they die. Well, he went to prison.
Sure.
But when he got out, he resumed his activities.
Okay. And I mean, to imagine, I mean, your book actually discusses 7 serial predators, and I can imagine, when we're talking even really just a relatively short period of time, that there was just so much overlap. And was there at any point where I know you said that the first 2 didn't really know each other. Did any of them know each other? They didn't work in any sort of tandem, or it was just
none of them. None of the serial offenders knew one another. Smith and Ross were both far east side. The city of Detroit's 148 square miles, so it's a relatively big area.
Mhm.
We had a couple that were working the west side that, again, the elements of serial offenders show up in at least one of each of these offenders that we caught in a real life basis. And it was kind of interesting to me because I had read the psychological analysis and the textbook analysis of serial offenders, how they, as they succeed at their offenses, the more successful they are, the more their area of operations spreads from their home base. They're if you can do a timeline on their offenses, map their crimes, and then go back to their earliest, you will be closest to their base of operations. So it gives our surveillance crews an area to look for them. when they're not involved in their activities, and that we used computerized crime mapping, and this is back in the early 2000s. It was fairly new. DNA had only been around since I think it was started in 1988 in England.
Right.
So in the United States, it was still being challenged in court at this time. So, and it was expensive, and it was very slow process to get a DNA analysis. It wasn't like it is today, So, at any rate, yeah, it was really challenging, and I think part of the reason that I wrote the book and got so interested in the whole concept was the number of cases in such a short period of time, and the fact that almost every one of the features of the serial offender that you would read about in a psychology book, we were able to actually find an example of in a real life case.
Sure. And well, like I said, with 7 individuals to identify and really to narrow down those descriptions. And it's interesting that you said Armstrong was really the one murderer out of all of them, and like you said, he killed people from all over the place. So he deviated a little bit from, I guess, the patterns that you were seeing, right?
Not well. We don't know that for certain. Armstrong. There's a book that I co-authored with another person that totally dedicated to the Armstrong case. Armstrong, we honestly believe, started killing at a very, very young age. He actually, my co-author interviewed him. He's in prison here in Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually talked about a time when he was 5 years old and discovered his new baby brother dead in the crib. And I wasn't in the room when he was talked to about that, but my co-author got the very, very distinct feeling that he was, in a way, trying to talk around the fact that he killed a little baby. This was a very, very disturbed individual. He was he was murdering prostitutes while he was assigned to the USS Nimitz aircraft carrier, serving in the Asian Pacific area where they were patrolling. They patrolled from the West Coast into Vietnam, the South China Sea, and all over there. Wherever they put into port and he got liberty, he would go ashore, find a prostitute, and leave her dead. Then he'd go back in on the ship and be gone. It was almost the perfect crime. And we found out through that one was particularly interesting because they actually assigned the real NCIS to Detroit for a couple of months to help us unravel the history of this guy, and they actually reached out through the State Department to talk to some of these foreign jurisdictions where he described having committed murders of prostitutes, and it was almost like they weren't really interested. I got the very distinct impression that they really didn't care how many prostitutes got killed. That was kind of like a public service to some of them. He admitted to one in Norfolk, Virginia, when he was discharged from the Navy just before he moved over to our western border, Dearborn Heights. And we contacted the Norfolk police, and they thanked us and closed the case. Said, well, he got 5 life sentences in Michigan. There's no reason for us to bring him here and suffer through the cost of appeals because Virginia had the death penalty at the time. So, but yeah, there's a book out about that case solely. It was really interesting. So
Patterns were, I guess, were completely different too, because I noticed like you really kind of identify them differently in the book. Like you said, the ATM killer, or the ATM rapist, the bicycle rapist, the Big Daddy. Because he was armed, right?
Two of them were armed. Big Daddy was armed, and at times, Paul Ellis Smith, the bicycle rapist, was known to have a gun.
Mhm.
I think he might have shot one of his victims. See, that's another indication of one of the principles of serial, or one of the characteristics of serial offenders is identified as escalation. They may start out as just a burglar,
Mhm.
breaking into homes. Smith broke into homes first when nobody was home, and then later on when the resident was home, he didn't really care because he had a gun. He'd break in, he'd ransack the place. In a number of early cases, he would leave without doing anything sexual, and then later on in his career, which spanned about a year, the first time before he went to prison, spanned about a year, he would encounter a female in one of the houses that he'd forced this way into to commit a home invasion. And after he would go through all of the valuables and set them aside for later removal, then he would assault the female victim if she were there alone. He never really shot anybody until later on in his career of offending before he got caught. This is the guy that went to prison in the middle and reappeared. Um, and there is a principle when you're looking at the progression of serial offenders. Like I said, they often start as they start as sometimes as window peepers,
Mhm.
become burglars, graduate into home invasion, graduate into sexual assault, without killing, and then some of these, and then like Armstrong, they graduate from sexual assault to murder, and Armstrong went from murder to necrophilia. He would go back and visit the victims' corpses and be intimate with.
So, I mean, apart from Armstrong, which one do you think was probably the most difficult to pin down and to catch?
Well, it's hard to identify. I think the one that was the most challenging for us was Smith, because we were expecting, like I said, at that one period or early in the late '90s, there we realized we had two offenders working the same area, and we expected that at some point we would catch both of them, and we only caught one, and the other one disappeared. Stop raping, no more rapes.
Right.
The rapes ended. His rapes ended when we caught the first offenders, Desong and Ross. So that was kind of a puzzle for us, and we knew the basic principle. They never stopped. They either relocate, die, or go to prison. We didn't know which one it was. We were just happy he wasn't victimizing any more schoolgirls. But like I said, 2 years later, the answer actually has emerged. He had just gotten out of prison, and I don't think he was out more than a week before he offended again. He was on the same bicycle.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah, kind of creatures of habit.
Yeah, I get it. That's interesting, though. Like you said, he's active, and then he leaves a cold trail, and then like you said, he picks up where he left off
Right.
after a period of time, and then
Two
and you
years
don't know what
later.
to expect.
2 years later.
Yeah. So, what are some of the other books that you've written?
I co-authored the book on John Eric Armstrong.
Uh-huh.
When I was working these major crimes units, violent crimes, and special investigations, I realized at the time that my career in Detroit, I had like 25 years at the time, and I was only staying because it was interesting.
Mhm.
I got tired. I stayed 31 and a half. So the last 5 years, we're catching all of these really, really interesting cases. And I realized that at some point in time, with an academic background and a demonstrated ability to at least write a dissertation, I thought that maybe at some point I'd like to maybe become an author. And it wouldn't be great if I could remember all of these high level cases, but so I started copying them. I copied the John Eric Armstrong investigative file, and then I copied the serial rapes, that series of serial rapes. And in that period, that those aren't the only really significant cases that our sex crimes unit handled. We also broke, and there'll be another book coming out next year. We broke a 5-state sex slavery ring. So it was a busy time, but it was very stimulating to be a part of it. Sometimes working hard can actually be fun,
Mhm.
and catching all these people can be really gratifying. Putting away all of these violent criminals.
Yeah.
I enjoyed the daylights out of it. I wish I could do it again, but unfortunately, the criminals never get any older, and the cops always do. I can't run as fast as I used to. I can't jump as high as I used to. All I can do is write about the good old days.
It's interesting. You did touch on something interesting that worth noting, that the sense of closure once that person is trapped, and all the victims and the victims' families, they at least get a little bit of peace knowing that this person isn't going to harm anyone else. Unfortunately,
Right.
can't undo what's been done, but at least
Like
there's
I
a
said,
stop to that.
the thing that drove me really through all of this was remembering and re-experiencing the incredibly talented people that I had working for me. I talked to detectives at the sex crimes unit. One of them years later, that I had actually assisted getting into the sex crimes unit, which has been changed to SVU now.
Okay.
I don't know why. It seems like there's a TV show out there that's been running for 25 years, maybe. But he saw me a few years after I retired. And he says, and I asked him, I said, "You still a sex crimes?" And he says, "Yeah, thanks to you." And I go, "What's that supposed to mean?" He says, "I never realized when I asked you to get me into it that once I was there, I couldn't get out." I go, you know, and I'm going, "Well, what do you mean you can't get out?" He says, "You know how hard it is for them to recruit people into a unit that does that kind of work?" He said, "It is not fun." He says, "Constantly having to deal with that kind of a crime and see those kind of victims." And I said, "Well, yeah, but you're doing something positive for the victims. You're getting these animals off the street and putting them in cages where they belong. And, think of all the people that aren't being victimized because you were instrumental in catching the bad guy and putting them away." He goes, "Well, yeah, there's that." But he says, "Man, I'll tell you," he says, "after a few years, it really begins to weigh on you." I'm like, "Yeah, no."
Oh yeah, I can imagine. But at least hey, it's kudos to you and all the folks there in the Detroit PD who've put in all that time and effort to bring these
Any
people to
police
justice.
department that has to investigate that field of criminality, uh, I did a lot of. I'm kind of a statistics guy, and I was discussing this book with my old boss,
Mhm.
and I was real familiar with the uniform crime reports, and I says, a question popped into my head at the time when I looked up the case load for our sex crimes unit throughout this period, because it dawned on me that they were working so hard on these really complex serial crimes. What about all of the other day-to-day, rape complaints that we were getting that weren't necessarily the victims of serials? And this crew, again, to illustrate how incredible these detectives were. Not only did they handle all these serials in a 2.5 to 3 year period, they were catching 2 to 3 rape cases a day
Wow.
that they had to also service while they were working these really complex cases. And it never ceased to, I mean, it never escaped me while I was supervising them. I was constantly in awe of their ability and their dedication, and I was hoping that might come out without me saying something really sickeningly emotional in the book. You know,
Yeah, the book I noticed that you have a very technical way of explaining a lot of the things that go in there. I mean, but that obviously comes with your background and stuff like that. But at least I think the reader really understands. I think from a law enforcement standpoint, what you guys went through in capturing all these people.
I was hoping that it would come through. I wanted the casual reader, as well as the seasoned detective, to be able to read it, completely understand it. If one of those sex crimes detectives were to pick up the book, they would understand it completely. But I wanted the average casual reader, the person interested in true crime, to be able to pick it up and not run into a bunch of technical jargon and acronyms and police terminology. I wanted them to understand what exactly these detectives had to go through in order to be as successful as they were.
Yeah, I definitely think that you certainly communicated that in your book. And as you said, there will be another book. You said in about a year or so.
Well, yeah, I'm working on it right now, and like I said, during this same period, there were there were two other serial rape cases that we broke, that we worked, and we caught the bad guys. But as I was scrambling to Xerox copies of case files, I must have missed those two. And there was the 5 state sex slavery ring. Um, we were approached by our organized crime division, asking us about rave parties that were occurring on the east side, same area as the East Side schoolgirl rapist, and but totally unrelated. It's just part of town you wouldn't want to live in. Anyway, there was a crew out of Chicago that would travel from city to city, and they would either entice or straight up abduct young females and move them. Like, they would pick up a 16-year-old girl walking the street in Detroit, put her in a van, take her to a motel room on the south side of town, and disorient her completely. Buy her food, buy her booze, get her high, give her some weed to smoke. The next thing she knows, she wakes up in a van on the south side of Chicago. Well, you know, kids that grow up in Detroit, you might think that, well, they're big city kids, but reality is that you get an inner city child growing up in any big city, and they might only be familiar with 8 or 10 square blocks around their home and their school. Right? You take an east side kid to the west side of the same city, they're going to be totally lost. Take them, 5 hours west of Detroit to Chicago, they're really going to be lost. The city's 5 times the size. And that in and of itself was a tool that these people used to keep their sex slaves under control. They would have them servicing, as prostitutes at night, working these rave parties. And then during the day, they made them sell cheap costume jewelry at strip malls to buy their food and whatnot. And they actually had, part of they called it a family. There was actually a gang. They had enforcers that would work with them. So it might look like these kids were out, in public, but they were being watched the whole time, and they were being forced to sell this crap jewelry. And then at night they'd be taken back to a big, rather large residence, both in Detroit and Chicago, because I raided both of them, and multi rooms and whatnot, and that's pretty much where they were being kept. And there's a couple of stories from some of the victims who was, and that's one of the things I had to be careful of writing about sex crime victims that aren't dead. I can't use names because that re-victimizes them. So, in that case, that I think is going to be called invisible victims, but I haven't gotten to a publisher yet, so I'm not sure.
Okay.
But anyway, another really interesting, very complex case. We followed that from Detroit to Chicago to Cleveland, Milwaukee, Gerry, Indiana, Findlay, and Toledo, Ohio.
Wow. Well, we appreciate you at least reporting on this stuff, so at least people understand, the real world of what's going on out there. So, and again, we want to let everybody know the name of the book that you have out. It is called Serial City: Detroit and the Hunt for Multiple Serial Predators. And this is Gerry Cliff. Gerry, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Not a problem. Happy to help.
Thanks so much to Dr. Gerry Cliff for coming on the show. And we, of course, have the link to his book in our show notes if you are interested in checking it out. I would say it's a really good read. Definitely a thorough read. You really help get your facts straight in this reading. I can guarantee you that. We're here every Wednesday. We do all sorts of things. We do True Crime Screening Room. We do Sherpa Screening Room. We do Sherpa Samples. We do Sherpa Selects. And, of course, Podcast Picks with me, Jim the Podcast Sherpa. So I don't think I can do much more than that. I think I got you guys pretty busy listening to me with a lot of variety, and I hope you are enjoying the variety. And if you want to know more about the show, you can follow us on social media at Sherpalution, and on TikTok, just Sherpalution with the number 1 on it. I'm out there. I've got all my silly videos out there. So we hope that you check that out. And Saturday, we will be doing some Sherpa Selects. And I think I'm actually coming to the end of the ones that I want to feature, but I still have some episodes that are actually already on the YouTube channel, but I haven't treated them yet as Sherpa Selects with the audio nice and pretty for you. And there are a bunch of episodes that are really good, and I hope that you enjoy and check them out on Saturdays or whenever you feel like listening, as a matter of fact, once they're launched. You can do that. You knew that, right? I thought so. Okay. So I guess that will do it for me. And thank you so much for listening. And I say to you, until then, viva la Sherpalution.
Thanks for listening to True Crime Screening Room. Subscribe to the show on podcast apps or the Sherpalution YouTube page. Until then, stay away from evil. And more important, viva la Sherpalution.